Well, I think the issue really is the tax status of the Chancellor's family, indeed any politician's family, a legitimate sphere of inquiry. And I think it is. I don't think there's any suggestion here that Mrs. Sunak has done anything illegal. The question is really, has the Chancellor himself, or indeed other politicians, are they benefiting from non-dom status? And that is something I think we should talk about. Meantime, it also brings up perhaps the much more important issue, is how can these incredibly wealthy people really be in touch with a lot of ordinary people? Now, the Chancellor has presented himself as a tax-cutting Chancellor, as a sort of Thatcherite, if you like. But the truth of it is we've never paid so much tax ever, not since the 1950s, perhaps. 70% or so is what the average person pays in tax. And can the Chancellor really be in touch with a lot of ordinary people? It's not just a question, of a mum who might be living in a tower block somewhere with a couple of kids. We're talking about not just low-income people now. We're talking about middle-income people who are finding it increasingly hard to cope. Can the Chancellor and do other very, very wealthy politicians really understand their lot? It seems at the moment to me that this country is heading to disaster. Between fuel bills, farmer friends tell me that food's going up as well. We have got all sorts of problems coming down the line, and I'm not convinced the government's doing anything like enough to address those issues.
Peter Whittle, I remember when I was at my previous employer, I'd done an interview with George Osborne. He wasn't quite Chancellor, he was Shadow Chancellor at the time. He got very cross. In fact, he rang my boss and complained that I'd had the temerity to suggest that somebody who was, if not a full-blown aristocrat themselves, then who had married into the aristocracy and was worth a few bob, could really understand what it was like to be poor. Politicians get really sensitive about this, the idea they can't relate to, what it is to buy a pint of milk, etc. Peter, does it matter?
Well, I think in a way, you see, Mike has sort of proved my original point we were talking about, which is that he was saying, how can somebody like Rishi Sunak and his wife, how can they possibly understand, what people are going through? That is a legitimate argument that we could have at any time. But I think that this was quite specific. This seemed to be anger at her financial arrangements, which all seemed to be above board. I think we go down a very dark route, in a way, if you start, poring over people's families, what their financial arrangements are. It could even be what their sexual arrangements are, or whatever they've done in the past. And that somehow this is some kind of moral judgment that should be shared by the politician involved. And I think that's not the right way to go. But I think that if you want to talk about should people who are chancellors and prime ministers, should they, for example, should there be a limit to what they should have in terms of wealth? I mean, you can argue about that if you like. I think it's a pretty spurious argument, really, but it's a different one.